Okay, what we're going to take a look at is essentially backplates inside of Photoshop and how to build them. But we're going to build them using our own custom photographs of textures in and around the environment. So one of the things you can use backplates for is something like this. If you want to do a mock-up of a quick little flyer here, we've bought this backplate in from a number of different pieces. We actually have three different types of textures here to build this. We've built this through some stucco from the side of my house here, and some rock from the front yard, and also a little photograph here, a little stucco with some basically just little branches to take a look at there. So that's how we've essentially built this piece, and that's what we're looking at. So let's go ahead and get started. So what we've started with is just a stucco JPEG. So photograph this on the side of my house, and I want to bring in some other pieces to that. So the very first thing I'm going to bring in here is I've got this rock JPEG that I'm going to drag in. So I'm going to minimize this one here, and I'm going to bring in this rock picture. So I'm going to drag this down and plant that right on top of it. Now, what we're looking at is essentially the rock, since it's the very first top layer here. So I want to label that rock, so I know what I'm working with. And then I'm going to come down here, make this into an editable layer, so it's going to be easier to modify it as we go back. So I'll double click here, and since this was stucco, I'll label that stucco there. Now, the very first thing we want to do is start to experiment with our blending modes, which I mentioned in another chapter. Blending modes inside of Photoshop, which we looked at earlier, and I'm going to utilize these blending modes to build my own custom texture for these two pieces. Now, since stucco is on the bottom, I'm not going to see anything, but we're going to start with looking at these two items here. Opacity is the first thing we can kind of tweak here a little bit, and as I bring the opacity down, you'll notice that the layer becomes more transparent. So the rock layer here, once I bring that down to about 50%, I'm able to see what's beneath that rock layer, and that stucco is actually beneath the rock layer. So as I decrease that all the way down, obviously the rock layer is invisible now. Makes no difference I have that off or on. And now I see what's directly beneath that is the stucco layer. And as I increase that once again, I see full 100% of the rock. The fill we'll talk about a little bit later, but essentially it's the same thing, but fill has to do more with the layer styles. Fill will obviously modify my rock layer too, but it wouldn't affect any layer styles that I had. But we're not going to access any layer styles, so we're really just concerned with the opacity at this time. Now, the second thing that I mentioned that we can work with is essentially our blending modes. And if we remember before, we have to mainly looking at these three groups of blending modes here. We've got our ability to darken the photograph, cut out the whites, our ability to lighten it, and then our ability to kind of bring out some midtones here with this group down at the bottom. So I'm going to start with multiply, and I automatically see how I've darkened this rock, because this rock layer has quite a bit of lights in it. Little lighter pieces. So as I kill all of the lighter pieces in this photograph, I essentially will make my entire piece darker. And I can go back to and adjust the opacity of a little bit, so I get rid of that effect just a hair. And now as I bring that opacity down to say somewhere around 93% or so, or 60%, I'm getting some pretty good results. I got kind of a nice mixture of the two now. The rock texture is starting to come in just a little bit, and it comes in down to the bottom with the stucco. And I can also go back and even experiment, with my screen mode, and drop down to overlay. Overlay is kind of nice there. Get a little bit of both there, and experiment and see what those items do for me. I'm going to click overlay just because of the, I'm not sure what type of monitors you guys are working with, and I'm going to adjust the opacity down just a hair there, so I see a nice mixture. Now the last thing I can do is I can bring in this last piece that I had. Here we go. And this is nice because it's got some, looks like some growth here on the end, some branches. Ideally, like the rock and the stucco, you want to face this head on. You want to be straight on when you take your photograph and get a nice even texture. I loved the texture, but I wasn't able to get into, it was gated off, so I couldn't really get to it. So did the best I could. Now, in this case, we're combining all of them, so it's not going to make as much of a difference. I'm going to drag this into it once again, and I'm going to basically go ahead and bring this in, what I'm looking at. And I'm going to, since it's more landscape, I'm going to go ahead and turn that on its side here, kind of rotate that, and zoom out just a little bit here. And when I bring this in, I'm going to go ahead and stretch this all the way out, so we get a nice mixture of both of them. We get some of that brick in there, and we're also getting some of the growth there to break it apart. So I'm going to come down here and I'm going to drop the opacity just a hair there, around 85–90%. And I'm going to start working with my blending modes just once again. And what's happening here is, and you can really see it here in some of the soft light overlay modes, that it's starting to break it out. And what I also had the benefit of is a nice color contrast here. And that color contrast is starting to come in nicely. And since I have this on a layer, I can kind of move that around depending on where I want that to fit inside of my photograph. So I get a nice little, I get some break apart here in my texture, and then I also get some color contrasting here, which is kind of nice. I'm going to go back to multiply, see what that is, much darker there. And then go back to my overlays, and really I'm looking at the soft light overlay. Those two are going to give me some nice effects in this case. So once I'm finished with that, one thing that I do like to do is go ahead and I place another layer on top of this. I place an adjustment layer. And in this case, I do a hue saturation adjustment, and I turn that on for colorize. That way, the colorize is going to remap all the pixels to a particular hue in my photograph. So I get a nice consistent color for what I want. So if I want a nice kind of a cool cold blue there, I can pull that in if I want to. If I want to decrease that saturation or increase it a little bit, I've got that type of adjustment to work with. And I click OK. And another thing you can also do is add an additional layer down here at the bottom and fill that in. Go to Edit, Fill, and fill that in with color. You know, something like 50% gray or whatever you want, or a particular color. And then you can drop down the opacity of some of these layers, and what's going to happen is these drop into that color. It goes, you know, as we decrease the opacity, I'm pulling in more of that background color there, and I can use that to experiment with what I've got here as well. And that's a good deal. You can also take that layer, and you can copy that layer too and put it between two items that you want, or the three texture pieces here, and really work around with it and start to adjust your opacity, and then go into and adjust your modes here, and work with the different items that you're getting. And that's a good way too to kind of sandwich two textures in there with some color, and experiment with that as well. So don't be afraid to add in other multiple layers. You can even add in more textures if you want to break this apart a little bit more. But this is nice. So we would go ahead and save this out to a JPEG in our case, and that would become our final texture.